Right, welcome back after the coffee break. And so now we are moving on to the policy debate, quality of life for territorial and citizen-centric policies. For this policy debate, we have 5 speakers. 3 of them are joining us online, and 2 of them are here in the studio with me. I will start by introducing our speakers that are there online. First of all, we have Franc Bogovič, who is a member of the European Parliament from Slovenia, but as I understand it, joining us from Brussels via the webinar today. We have Romina Boarini, who's Director for the Centre of Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability and Equal Opportunities at the OECD. And we have Lili Madjar, who's Director of the Regional Agency of the Ljubljana Urban Region. So those are the 3 that you see on the screen up here behind me. And then here in the studio is Alenka Smerkolj, who is Secretary General of the Alpine Convention, and Wiktor Szydarowski, who is Director of ESPON EGTC, and you've seen him already from his introduction earlier this morning. So I'm going to start with Alenka here in the studio, and then I'm going to be coming to our speakers joining via the webinar. So to you, first of all, Alenka, the question very much is, we've been talking today about the concept of quality of life, which seems to be taking on a greater importance in policy discussions. How is that important to you in your work in the Alpine Convention?
The purpose of policies and policy making is to improve people's lives. And civil society interests therefore need to be at the forefront all the time. And of course, finding a balance among the economic, social and environmental aspects of development is key to policy making. But as, of course, it is very easy to say, but hard to do. And we know that people in different communities, and especially in different territories, perceive quality of life very differently. And therefore, policy making is only sustainable in our view, and my view also personally, if it's really done through a participative process moderated by a neutral party. I have also a personal experience on this, and it works, but only if this is the way how it's done. And it's also basically the only way how we can learn what people feel, what people request, and what they need, in essence, to be happy. When we talk about territorial quality of life in the Alps, well, the Alps might seem like a single large entity, but of course, indeed, they are a unique region in Europe with a lot of common challenges, with a lot of common characteristics shared by all 8 countries of the Alps. But however, looking closer, we see a very, very contrasted reality. And the Alps are one of the least densely populated regions in Europe. On the other hand, they are the most densely populated mountain region in the world. Moreover, mountain regions are characterized by very different living conditions, environments, and also expectations of the people, depending on whether the focus is on urban centers, on the peri-urban areas, or let's say rural areas, which some of them are also very much remote. And added to this, in the fact that each region and each country has its specificities. I'm sure you can begin to get a sense of the challenge in front of us, but we still decided to tackle it. And we are taking it up because, why? Because the Alpine environment, with all these specificities and constraints and assets, of course, is our home. And the Alpine inhabitants, I have to say, are at the center of the Alpine Convention since the beginning, because the convention with its protocols is guiding the way, and it has been people, inhabitants centered. And this is what I think we need also today. A high quality living environment is one of the preconditions for a good and healthy life, both physically and mentally. And therefore, the purpose of these legally binding documents that the Convention brings is to ensure sustainable development, which of course leads to the preservation and improvement of the quality of life in the Alps. These are the guiding principles for all the policies adopted by the Alpine Conference, composed of the ministers of all Alpine countries, plus a representative of the European Union. These policies are overarching and provide the backbone for sustainable life in the Alps. And it is then to individual territorial entities like countries, governments, of course, regions, municipalities, to implement them and, of course, do things in a way that are adapted to the specific needs of each territory, in short.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to move to our first speaker from the webinar, Mr. Bogovič. You've heard here already what Alenka Smerkolj has said. I'd like to ask you a similar question, which is how you use these concepts of quality of life in your work in the European Parliament, and also in particular in your case as an MEP sitting in the Regional Affairs Committee in the European Parliament.
Good morning to everybody. Greetings to Alenka, who started this debate. We cooperate in past a lot, and also with other participants. Yes, quality of life, we can speak from different angles, but as I said, as a Regi member and also Agri member and also mayor in the past, for sure it's very important that we prepare conditions for quality life and also jobs, and many things depends on this. And in European Parliament, we know all that there are two basic principles of solidarity and subsidiarity. And through this cohesion policy, common agriculture policy, now we have resilient and recovery fund. We try to ensure this quality of life in all parts of the European Union to build first of all the basic infrastructure and give possibility to people for jobs and for other things which are necessary for quality of life. We all know that in Europe is very diverse. There are big differences, and these policies helps to bring Europe more together. But at the end of the day, we still have big these migration flows from rural to urban on one side, and from less developed regional countries to more developed regional countries. And these are things what is necessary to help through these tools which European Union also has in their hands, and these are European policies. At last days and weeks, months, we all speak also about our environment, and it's very important. When Alenka spoke about Alpine region, it's very important to think about environment in Alpine region and also in other parts of Europe. And we also try through different policies, as we have under this umbrella of Green Deal. On one side, common agriculture policy, farm to fork policy, biodiversity policy and strategies, and on the other side we have also this big Fit for 55 package, which also try to prepare conditions that we will follow this Paris Agreement goals, and what we saw also in the Glasgow conference. So we can speak about a lot about these topics. For me, it's really very important that people can ensure their quality of life. As I understand this, usually people like to live and to work close to the region they were born. Sometimes we have also, as I said, this big migration, and also I work in European Parliament on the one concept of smart villages, where we try to fulfill this gap between rural and urban areas, gap in digitalization, gap in quality of life, and through this initiative, we really try to ensure quality of life, infrastructure on one side, and the jobs on another side, and that's very important that fulfill the needs of people also in urban areas. So we can start from our family to our village, and we come to the European level or worldwide level. So that's for the beginning.
Right, thank you very much indeed. And that also builds a neat bridge from our keynote speech this morning, which was about precisely that topic of the increasing potential urban-rural divides as a result of coronavirus, and some of the first studies about that. So, Mr. Bogovič, the slides from this morning may be of interest to you too. I'd like to move on next to Romina Boarini from the OECD. Romina, I would like to ask you about we've heard from the Alpine Convention, we've heard what's happening in the European Parliament. I'd like you to set this quality of life discussion into the wider OECD context, perhaps out beyond the borders of Europe, and explain a little bit what the OECD's approach is here, please.
Yes, good morning, and thanks so much for putting together this wonderful event. Quality of life has been, I would say, at the center of our actions in the OECD since a while. As Alenka was saying, really quality of life is the number one sort of priority of governments. They are there to improve people's well-being and quality of life. In the past, I think the focus was put too much on economic systems, regardless of whether they would actually be able to produce and deliver actual well-being. And the way we define well-being at the OECD, in line, of course, with what the international community is doing, is actually looking at progress on what matters to people. Really, we're looking at the dimensions that matter the most from the perspectives of people. And of course, one of the issues, I would say, of the traditional approach that quality of life sort of approach doesn't have is the fact that in the past we would overlook things such as sustainability, the planet, so to speak, but also distributional issues. So we would just look at the average living conditions in a country. We would look at how the country as a whole or the economy as a whole would perform, and we would actually not paying attention to the diversity of living experiences that obviously are very characteristics of all countries. And of course, even more when we started looking at those issues from a very place-based perspective and territorial perspective. And I think the speakers before me were obviously highlighting the fact that the differences are many. In terms really of what matters to people, in terms of what drives, in fact, the living conditions and the sense of people's well-being. So really, the way we are looking at quality of life in the OECD does, I would say, or put really in action, I think, these three important principles. First of all, the multidimensionality aspect, not just look at the economic aspect of people's lives, but also at the non-economic aspects, typically things such as social connections, the living together, the quality of the territories, trust in others, social capital. So really all the elements that matters a lot to quality of life, and yet are not necessarily about economic and living conditions. The other element is to look at not only, of course, that the well-being of people's living today, but obviously having into strong considerations the well-being of future generations. And therefore, we, in our well-being framework at the OECD, look at the key assets and key resources that sustain well-being over time. So the natural capital, which of course is so important for the hubs, but also the economic capital, the social capital, I already mentioned it, and human capital. And finally, we're looking at at the who actually, so at the people, at the specificities of the groups that we are considering, being women, being men, being, of course, people that are, or communities that are underrepresented in the economy or in the society, being groups with different ages. I would say that since we started this work more than 10 years ago, we made a lot of progress, not only on the common definitions of well-being. I think I always want to tell the story that when we started, the OECD started talking about well-being 10 years ago, some, I would say, of our constituencies and some of the governments were looking at us like, they didn't necessarily understand what we were talking about, although they were saying, you know, this is very subjective. How can we actually put behind this concept anything that is rigorous, anything that is data and evidence driven? And this is what we have accomplished together with many. Of course, it's not just the OECD, but a number of other actors at global level work on those notions. And so even if, of course, there is a diversity of people's understanding of well-being and perceptions of well-being, nevertheless, you know, you can obviously add a lot of evidence into it, and certainly that would be you know, the main approach in the OECD, to start with the data. But also I was very encouraged to see, of course, that in the approach that ESPON put forward, a lot of focus has also been put on the indicators. Obviously, everything that we are doing on quality of life needs to be very much based on factual assessments, and that's obviously speaks of more important data sort of collection efforts that we're making in the OECD together with the international statistical community. Of course, everything we do on quality of life those days takes a special resonance and significance in the very specific policy context that we are all going through. We are still in the middle of a pandemic, one of the certainly most serious crisis that started as a sanitary and health crisis, and you know, it turned into a social and economic crisis. But we also obviously, you know, in a very, very specific point in time where we are facing mega trends such as climate change. And so again, there, the notion of quality of life is very important and very relevant. We published last week a report that shows that the pandemic has impacted every single aspect of people's well-being in all OECD countries and in all geographies of those countries. So nothing has been spared from, again, the jobs, from the incomes of households, but of course also to clearly the health aspects of this crisis, but the mental health, the elements that again perhaps are closer to the notion of subjective well-being, but things also such as the feelings of inclusion or exclusion in society, and of course the trust in others and trust in government. So everything has been impacted. People's and especially some groups of people have paid the largest price. We know that some will also, if no immediate action is taken, actually with a focus on improving their quality of life right now, those groups also may suffer the most in terms of the long-term sort of consequences of the pandemic. And the quality of life certainly should be the focus of any recovery and reconstruction plans. A couple of final sentences just to say that, of course, we look on quality of life in the OECD at various, I would say, levels. We started by looking at national or taking, let's say, a national approach, but obviously we also very much dig into the specificities of a territorial approach to quality of life. And I have wonderful colleagues that are working in the Center for Enterprises of the OECD that did very specific work that actually unpacked a well-being framework and the quality of life framework to understand the very specific conditions of territories, and also, you know, the very specific dimensions of quality of life, namely the importance of very, very good quality services that local government should provide to enhance quality of life. So certainly territorial element and the place-based dimensions is key. We can't just look at quality of life as a whole or for nations at the level of nations, but obviously we need to very much engage with the very specific understanding of what is driving and enabling a good quality of life for all citizens at territorial level. It is obviously an approach that puts citizens at the very center. It does it a number of ways, not only just from a very definitional point of view, as I mentioned, really every serious approach to quality of life and well-being needs to start from what matters to citizens, not necessarily to the economy as a whole or to the system as a whole, but really what matters to citizens. Secondly, in our own approach to quality of life, we're looking at things such as civic engagement, civic participation, so really to what extent citizens are empowered to shape the society where they want to live. And finally, the very important participatory approaches, Alenka was recalling it in her intervention, and also this is something that, I saw it as a distinctive feature of the ESPON approach to it. Quality of life is something that can't be defined by experts, can't be defined by technocrats. It needs to be defined, it needs to be discussed with citizens. So again, we need to have strong consultations around quality of life. And again, this is what this was at the core of the ESPON's approach. So I want to commend really the ESPON team and Wiktor in particular for leading such an interesting piece of work. And again, really putting those participatory approaches at the very center of the work, because this is really an agenda that requires fundamentally ownership by citizens. So we need ownership, we need buy-in. And finally, of course, the other, I would say, interesting aspect of this agenda is that this actually comes with a lot of transparency and accountability for public policies. So that's the only way we can have, we can follow, in fact, to reconnect people with public policies. And we know that in some countries in recent years, that strong connection actually was not always there. So really everything that is around quality of life done together with citizens, constructed with citizens, hold this strong promise of reconnecting citizens with the institutions that serve them.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. From that more global view of the issue, let's take it down to the more practical and Slovenian level. I'd like to now give the floor to Lili Madjar, who's director of the regional agency for the Ljubljana urban region, perhaps also building on some of the statistics and maps which were presented by our speaker in the previous round, Janez, who looked particularly at that individual regional level in Slovenia. So why are these concepts of quality of life important to the work that you do, and how does thinking about quality of life make a difference in comparison to the usual practices in your work? Lili, your thoughts, please.
Hello and good morning to everybody from Ljubljana. I would prefer to be with you on Bled, but unfortunately I have some health problems, and I hope we will meet inside sometime in future. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Development Agency. Maybe I would start with a short statement. Why is quality of life so important? I believe there are three reasons, at least three reasons on all the levels. First, because it is citizen-centric. Everything is about a citizen, and I believe that citizen interest must be at the center of the policymakers, of decision maker, of all decisions. Then this is complex concept, and with all these indicators, it helps us to better understand people's perception of their needs, of their quality of life, of their living conditions, and goes beyond this economic data, economic standard we are used to. And the third reason is that it enables us to understand differences among different territories. It's really important because we should be always very careful to generalize, because people's perception of quality differs from urban areas to rural, from mountains to border regions, and we should always respect these differences. So today I represent regional level. Our Ljubljana urban region connects 25 municipalities just in central part of Slovenia. It's really a small region in comparison to Europe, but it's very heterogeneous. So we have very urban capital, Ljubljana, and we have very rural areas. And even on such a small dimension, it's important to understand all these differences. I believe we, with our participatory approach, we are already working on this quality of life concept, because we are a basic and the most important institution for promotion of development on a regional level, and we prepare strategic documents. And when we prepare these strategic documents, we include people from all the territory, from all the municipalities, from civil servants to mayors, to decision makers. And then in other dimension, we include people from the different backgrounds, from businesses to NGOs, to experts from knowledge and research institutions. And if I'm talking from practice, we didn't ask them directly about quality of life. We asked them about accessibility to public transport, about living with for disability people, about their jobs, education, and so on. But when we together create a vision and goals of these regional documents, the quality of life is always at the very center of the vision and of our goals. Then we include also citizens, because we make our draft of our documents public and everybody can comment. We must harmonize our documents with national level, so then we match it again in our region. So with this participatory process, we include different levels, people from all the territory and people with most different backgrounds. And what we find out, the basic question is quality of life. This is what is important to work for the better quality of life on the regional level, but we should be harmonized with local levels, with national level and European. So I believe this is our common story, and I believe this ESPON days on Bled are really important for our future work. Maybe this for the beginning.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. In this round, I'd then like to give the floor to Wiktor, particularly with the focus then on the question of how can ESPON help policymakers further embed quality of life dimension into the policymaking process. So Wiktor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jon. I'm in this fortunate position that I'm not saying some was just to start the debate, but rather to even conclude on some of the elements we've heard already from my predecessors. And I'm very grateful to see that the concept of the quality of life is being practiced already, as presented by Alenka, by Lili, also how Romina presented this, outlined this concept as featured in the OECD works, is a melody to our heart. So I also understand that at different levels, people are engaged, are being involved in the process of co-creating the best possible conditions for their work, for flourish, for being sustained in their life and work ambitions. Indeed, I think many important statements were said by my predecessors about a sort of a postulate to make the policies accountable. And as I may only recollect from the introductory speech, to make Europe close or closer to citizens, we need to have policies that are created with people and not for people. So knowing what actually is important for them, what matters to citizens, what drives people, what enables their life choices, what is actually that they feel, need and request is at the basis of each single public policy. And this is our very strong message, that we would like to see that these good examples presented in Slovenia and somewhere else as well are a common denominator for making, designing and evaluating public policies. We need also to understand that this exploratory approach with the citizens' participatory approach is not a one-off exercise. Because of many changes, the dynamic situation we are in, impact of crises, a need to ensure the well-being of future generations, we need to see it as a repetitive exercise, because the conditions, the circumstances, the way we perceive the things may change. So it's not that we agree with the group of people, this is our common target and common vision, no matter what. But we need to be responsive to the changes these people really encounter and face in their daily life. So this sort of, as we promoted ESPON Living Labs, should be again a recurrent exercise with the people. And we all the time need to adapt the way we work with the people to the profile of the people, because the concept presented by ESPON, we feel, should be underpinning our public policies, no matter where you are. But again, to make it citizen-centric, to make it place-based, we need to understand the preconditions for the people. So we are glad to see that there are many initiatives that dwell on this ESPON approach already in the public policy different levels. Right now we tested it in the cross-border area in Slovenia, Croatia and Italy. And there is interest from many other areas and stakeholders. Let's test it. Let's see how it works, that we involve the citizens. And we also put the quantitative data together with qualitative, subjective information on how people breathe the quality of life. So again, this is a complex concept, but I think that we can actually break it down to very interesting, nice steps for all policy making endeavors right now and in the future. Thank you.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Wiktor. And so let's actually then bring that round then to the second round. So I'm going to come back to our speakers and from the kind of wider concepts now to make it very relentlessly practical, which is essentially to say what I want to hear from each of you is some concrete examples of how this has actually worked in practice. And so I'm going to come to you, if you don't mind, Lili, Madjar, first of all, particularly with your experience doing this work in Ljubljana, a city which has, in the rankings of cities of a good quality of life, often features quite highly. But nevertheless, and this is a very personal observation from having been in Ljubljana quite a lot over the years, was very radical about its transport policy in the city centre. Basically, there are no cars in the inner city. Was that something that there was a public demand for, and to the extent to which is that something that reflected this type of thinking about what, working along the lines of the citizens, or are there other examples when you are talking to people in other cities or other regions to say, okay, this is what we did concretely in the Ljubljana region, and exactly how we did it. So can you give me something solid and concrete of a kind of concept of integrating quality of life into what you've been doing practically on an everyday basis, please?
So once more, hello to everybody. Yes, I would first say that I'm representing development region, right, which means Ljubljana and 24 smaller surrounding regions. So this closing the city center for cars, I would say that this was initiative from people, but it was a decision made by mayor, and it was really tough decision. But the public transport is one of the key issues we are performing in our region for more than 15 years. There was a decision made that this is one of our key challenges, and we are working on it. There is one more information I must provide to you. So that in Slovenia, we have regions just for statistical and development reasons. So this means that we do not have competencies of our own, no income of our own. And our work is more or less never-ending negotiations. But when some decisions on the region between these 25 mayors are made, then it works. So we started with park and ride network in the region, with strengthening public transport. We tried to catch the transporters coming to, migrants coming to Ljubljana, just around Ljubljana. We are going step by step for 15 years. And this is one of the reasons then that we really have nice improvements in this hard challenge in Ljubljana. Then we are working together in other challenges in wasting policies, in wastewater policies. So working together is really something, and I believe that this participatory process and citizen-centric centered process can bring us to our goals to really improve living conditions for our citizens.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I'd next like to come to Alenka Smerkolj with a similar question. Are there examples, practical examples that you can cite from your work, maybe even cross-border ones in the Alpine region, of integration in a very practical sense of integration, the concept of quality of life, that you can tell us?
Indeed I can, and I think we really have quite some of such examples. The highest body of the Alpine Convention is the Alpine Conference. This is composed by the ministers of the Alpine countries plus the European Union. And each 2 years they meet and we always have outcomes. And most of the outcomes, and I will just then perhaps explain a few of them, are really very, very important for people and for the quality of life in the whole Alpine region. For us, perhaps besides the participative approach and all the policies, whatever we discuss, whatever declaration we have, all this is, of course, this needs to be discussed, and it's not just the administrative level that is engaged, but we speak with the NGOs, we speak with the municipalities, so it's like everything is done in a participatory way. But besides just participatory processes, also cross-sectoral aspect is really, really important. And in the last years, I think that most of the decisions that were taken by the Alpine Conference, so by the ministers, that they are really somehow cross-sectoral. I would perhaps start with climate change. Climate change is one of the greatest threats to quality of life as well. And in the Alps, we feel this challenge and the consequences of the climate change even more than in the rest of Europe. And the ministers or the governments or the Alpine Conference, the convention responded by, we established an Alpine Climate Board and tasked that board with steering and bundling action in the framework of the Alpine Convention. And this board consists of experts, first of all, from different fields, not just climate change experts. And in a participative process, they elaborated a strategic document called the Alpine Climate Target System 2050. And the main objective of this system is to make the Alps not just climate neutral, but also climate resilient in the next 30 years. And to achieve this, multiple targets have been identified for 12 different sectors, including many cross-cutting benefits and specific targets in the field of municipal action. I think this is crucial. And all this were, since the document was then adopted in 2019, the Alpine Climate Board worked to develop concrete steps for the next 5 to 10 years. And we call these steps implementation pathways to achieve these set targets. And these specific implementation pathways compose Climate Action Plan 2.0, we call it, which was also adopted by the Alpine Conference in 2020. But it's not where we stop. We now work on the implementation pathways, but we also move forward. Just last week, the Alpine Climate Board held a webinar on climate neutral lifestyles. ways to improve lifestyles and consequently, of course, quality of life were highlighted, and the topic will be developed further. And I guess we will have already in September next year some further, let's say, concrete action also in this. But this is not the only thing or the only concrete case. Each individual presidency of the Alpine Convention has as one of its main outcomes a report on the state of the Alps. And I can just name the last two, perhaps. The seventh report on the Alps dealt with natural hazard risk governance. And the eighth report focused on air quality, which has, of course, very clear effects on our health. And of course, the topics of both these reports are citizen-centered, and also the recommendations resulting from them very clearly aim at improving people's lives, and this is what matters. So it's all connected. Now the Alpine Convention has its presidency. We have Switzerland as presidency, and the ninth report that they are now together with working on is also elaborated following the same goals. This time, the main topic, the main theme are Alpine towns, and the Alpine towns are looked from different perspectives. In addition to the scientific analysis of the function or different functions of the Alpine towns, the report will also include 5 scenarios for the development of Alpine towns, in which people, again, are put in the center of the discussion. And these scenarios were developed. We already see them coming in a very participative process, where not just experts and stakeholders were involved, but also representatives of towns from all over the Alps. So these scenarios, of course, will then need to be adjusted to the local circumstances, but they will definitely serve as a tool for decision makers at different policy levels. And whenever you discuss a strategic implication, this is what you always need. Scenarios are very, very important. Well, last but not least, Slovenia is taking over the Alpine Convention presidency September next year. And I'm very, very happy that Slovenia decided to choose quality of life as the topic for their report on the Alps. So I'm very much looking forward to the outcome of, let's say, that will be then already in 2024. But this is a bit of a concrete actions that the Alpine Convention does, where the quality of life is somehow highlighted.
Right, excellent. And certainly I appreciate also your point about sustainability and sustainable transporters having to trying to cross the Alps by train and bicycle to get to Bled from Germany. I can speak from some personal experience in the last couple of days. Right, I'd like to ask Wiktor next. So if you're dealing with policymakers and you want practical, solid examples of integration of quality of life, ESPON no doubt has some, and then I'll come to the OECD and European Parliament perspectives after that. But a few words from you, Wiktor, first.
Well, we of course have some tools. It's not that we try to be as persuasive as possible, but of course we like to be as illustrative and inspirational as possible to the larger extent. So the policy briefs that we are publishing with the outcomes of our activities is one example how we work then to feed the policy dialogue with good practice examples. Because while we believe in the power of evidence, the evidence without the illustration that it really works in practice is probably meaningless. The people feel it's perhaps quite abstract, it doesn't fit to their reality, their development characteristics. So we need to convince them that there is a fairy territory that already has carried out a similar exercise, like the Living Lab on the territorial quality of life. It's worthwhile pondering upon, can we apply it also the way that it was done in that specific area? of course, bearing the differences that might still need to be taken into account. And then also we tried then to use some other instruments like video clips that we do together, for instance, with the presidency of the EU Council, in this case Slovenia, where we put up mayors and citizens to speak about, in that sense, the quality of life, how they perceive the quality of life. So that what we are doing as ESPON is, of course, to inspire policy making, but based on practical examples of something that has been successful. Right. So this is how we build our policy recommendations. Please go and test because it's worth your time. And I think this is a very important motto of everything that we are doing under the, say, flag of ESPON. This is not a theory, but this is a very specific way that we could see that your policies work better because they are then made accountable, they respect civic engagement and also respect ownership. We don't like to see that policymakers are the sole owners of the policies because the people are the owners of the policies and policymakers are executors of the policies. And I think this is very important also to change the mindset of how we perceive our policy making. And this is exactly the way that we engaged with the citizens, policymakers and stakeholders in this cross-border area that was composed of the coast-to-coast area in Slovenia, Istria county in Croatia and Trieste in Italy. We created 3 specific means for the people to get engaged. Living Lab focus groups to discuss in smaller circles what is my priority in life, how we see my life. Digital photo contest, what are the distinctive features of living in this specifically cross-border area. And the survey app for the people to give us information on the best and worst aspects of living in the cross-border area, but also the reasons. So to identify what's behind, what is underpinning our choices. And now the question is then how to take it on board. Because even if we produce some nice, beautiful reports, it's not that these reports immediately will be consumed by the policy. So we need leaders. We need political leaders. We need motivated people. And this is why we are talking to many politicians. Please assume this leadership on the ground based on the very sound and very good, we feel, very firm, powerful even, territorial evidence stemming from the ESPON research and also outreach activities like this one today. This is also the means for us to communicate on the quality of life to the people, to the policymakers. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. And indeed, it's not so dissimilar in the cross-border region to the very tensions that Lili Madjar was talking about among the 25 mayors that she has to persuade to go in the same direction in the Ljubljana region. I'd like to come to Romina Boarini next about practical examples of how OECD is helping out, perhaps also mirroring some of the sorts of stories that Wiktor and others are saying. Romina, your thoughts about this point?
Yeah, no, thanks about the question. I think we obviously are very encouraged to see so much progress being done, not just on the measurement aspects of it. It starts with measurement, but obviously needs to then, be translated into the practice of things. And so I think those examples that we've shared are very good illustration. For us, this is what we call the Wellbeing 2.0 agenda, and that's actually why my center, WISE, was created, because that's about really integrating well-being into the practice of policies and mainstreaming it as much as we can. So I'll share with you some experiences that we actually have observed in OECD countries, and those experiences have been, in fact, have been carried out at different geographical level, national, regional, territorial, city level. So it's quite rich and diverse. Many initiatives essentially where well-being data tools and frameworks have been integrated either to set the agenda, so define high-level objectives, or to formulate policies ex ante. So when you are thinking about elaboration in the design of policies, you want to start by an understanding of what are the critical challenges in terms of quality of life that some are facing. In some cases, the integration of well-being objectives and approaches has been done more when it was about implementing policies. So the design was already there, but there was a question of how do we actually engineer the policies and how do we actually do it in a way that is can be made acceptable to people. In some other cases, we saw initiatives that were looking at monitoring quality of life. So, indicators is something that obviously can inform sort of the high-level design of policies, but is also something that you want to put in place to ensure that you are tracking policy and impacts of policies as these are unfolded, and obviously evaluating policies. And so, it's something, it's part of the process, I would say, of the business model well-being, that you always want to look at the actual success of policies from the perspectives of whether they have enhanced people's well-being. And perhaps I'll give you some more examples from some countries of how those initiatives sort of have been organized. We have seen in a few countries actually well-being started driving budget processes and budget allocation. It's very simple reasons behind that. I mean, first of all, very often in those countries, it is Ministry of Finance, and obviously when we're talking about national level type of decision making, but in local governments, obviously it is a similar case, that it is actually the people that are in charge, let's say, of the economic planning and spending that have sort of ample visibility on the entire spectrum of the policies. They are the ones that are making decisions, in trade-offs in terms of budget allocation. And so it was interesting to see, for instance, that in France, in Italy, in Sweden, in New Zealand, in Iceland, in Canada, these are all countries essentially that have started including in the budget process the concrete consideration of well-being objectives. And of course, experiences have been quite diverse. I would tend to agree with what Wiktor was saying, that many times and often those experiences start to be as sandboxes. So, you are piloting things and you don't necessarily know whether things are going to work. And that's why you also want to obviously check, as I mentioned, so systematically and with continuity if they're working. But those very interesting experiments and sandboxes actually now are producing quite interesting results, because we see that actually incorporating well-being objectives and indicators in the actual definition of budget and in the actual allocation of resources is producing, first of all, a change in the culture of governments, but is also really changing, I think, the actual decisions that are taken. So, we're seeing programs being focused, for instance, on mental health, on child well-being, that, without the consideration, the explicit consideration of those well-being objectives, would have not come true. So really, we can see the difference that well-being thinking is making. And of course, it also creating new questions, raising new challenges. So, the administrations are working to develop new capacity, new skills, actually to be able to evaluate policies from a well-being perspective. And I would say this is certainly a challenge that speaks probably the most to local governments and territorial entities, because obviously, or maybe not so obviously, but obviously they start, I would say, they have less resources to perhaps to devote to the consideration, to the analysis of well-being. And so this is certainly one area where more progress needs to be made. On the one hand, the local governments probably have the most acute needs of thinking in terms of quality of life, because they see the demand of higher quality of life coming from the citizens, all the time. But on the other hand, perhaps also they have more fragile structures to start with, and so more needs to happen on that front. Nevertheless, those budget process is very important. And why budget? Because of course you need to give real incentives to people to change things and change the way they operate their policies, and so it needs to be supported by different money allocations. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. The other example I want to give: national development plans, performance frameworks, fiscal strategies. Of course, Scotland is an interesting example because it's sort of a state. It needs to fit within the broader economic and political strategies of United Kingdom. But of course, they also have some autonomy in some of the decisions they make. So they developed a very interesting national performance framework, started with indicators, but then from the indicators, actually, they really completed a very interesting process where they defined a roadmap for implementing those objectives in a very, very granular and specific way through new measures and programs. Of course, we worked with Slovenia and Alenka in the first place, to follow the national development strategy. where well-being and quality of life were at the core, but many other countries are working, in this way. Interestingly, I would also like to highlight that some countries started creating new institutional structures that actually added as a very specific mission to look at what is working from the perspective of enhancing people's well-being. And I would like to mention United Kingdom with a set of initiatives, What Works Centers for Wellbeing, where they are really looking at a number of programs that are designed and put in place, very often indeed at place-based level, at territorial level. And again, very much looking at not just an analysis of things, but very very often a concrete considerations of the challenges that the actors are going through on the ground, and what they can learn in terms of lessons that obviously can be shared and replicated by other departments and by other, for instance, municipalities. And finally, and I'll stop with this one to say that, of course, as I mentioned, well-being constitutes part of the solution. Sometimes people start looking at these frameworks to say, oh, these are very complex, they really raise additional challenges, data challenges, policy challenges, etc. So, they are almost tempted to drop the ball and say, we'd rather go back, to the traditional way of doing policy making, which is very much siloed approaches, focusing on one question at a time. Actually, no, well-being is the solution to those problems, because well-being comes with this very much integrated approach that allows to bring together those different policy objectives in a very cohesive and consistent way. And governments had to experiment, had to come up with also new tools that support these integrated approaches. For instance, the United Kingdom Treasury published a green book on appraisal and evaluation in central government. So I'm talking about central government here, but it is a very interesting book that is reviewing essentially the state of art of some of very specific tools. I'm talking about cost and benefit analysis, impact assessment methodologies that are used, by policymakers and civil servants when they want to assess the values and the benefits and cost, of course, of measures that again are shaped fundamentally by well-being thinking. Similar work being done by New Zealand treasuries or through the Living Standards Framework and budget guidance. And again, it is quite interesting to see that we're seeing in a number of OECD countries the emergence of those very concrete toolkits, almost manuals, for putting those concepts and objectives in action. Much still needs to happen. Much is going to happen at the OECD and the White Center. More specifically, we are committed actually to create a space where governments can come together, can share, can learn from each other, can confront the challenge, and can address challenges on these agendas as they go forward. I think it was clear from the examples that we heard so far, from the discussions that we had this morning, that this is obviously a very dynamic debate. This is a dialogue that obviously never stops. Quality of life demands and quality of life challenges change as we speak. We saw it in the context of the pandemic. We're going to see it in the next, the next 50 or 100 years as we shift to green economies and green societies. So we also need that capacity to obviously stay open and keep this conversation live and as live as possible, because the needs evolve, and so the tools and the conversation that's supporting the action also need to evolve in parallel to that.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Last but not least in this round, I'd like to go to Franc Bogovič in the European Parliament for your concrete examples. Also, particularly if you wish, also in your specialist area with regard to smart villages, where you might have some interesting examples of how that's increased people's quality of life.
Yes, that's, although I'm a member of European Parliament, it's close to me, to my heart, to speak about concrete things. First of all, I started as politicians in my village when I was 23 years, when we built roads and other basic infrastructure. Later, I was 13 years mayor in municipality Krško in Slovenia. It was between 1998 and 2011. And here's, for example, my one experience, which I will share with you. When we got 6.4 million European money from Regional Development Fund to build optical fibers broadband network in my municipality. One farmer from the hill, on the top of the hill, the highest farm in the municipality, 800 meters high in the hills, he came to me, Franz, you will build this infrastructure. I really don't know what you speak about, but my children want this. And if not earlier, last year, through the COVID crisis, also this farmer recognized what it means if you have optical fiber network at your home in COVID crisis when we got these messages from the COVID. And that was for me very important when I started to be member of European Parliament in 2014. And when I heard big words about these mega trends like demographic changes, growth of population, urbanization, 75–80% of people will live in 2050 in metropolitan areas. When we heard a lot about digitalizations, I started and asked myself and also my colleague in European Parliament, what we will do for rural areas that we will fulfill, first of all, this digital gap, that it will be possible that people will have good condition for quality of life, what we speak about also in rural areas. And really, we started many initiatives from both sides, top-down, bottom-up. The European Commission organized this European Network for Rural Development. We put together more than a few thousand of good practices from all regions of the Europe. On Bled, like you are today, we had on Bled a big European conference on smart villages. When we started to push this policy top-down, there was Bled Declaration. This year we had as presidency country, I organized together with Minister for Agriculture, again in Slovenia, in Kersel-Reichenburg, big conference about this. On 1st of October, it was possible to be physical there. And I was also physically on 1st of November in Dubai on Expo, when we speak about this top-down approach. But what is for me more important, I organized more than 30 roundtables in Slovenia, where always, I know these people in these areas, we always bring together good practices which are between us and we must share them. These are good practices as in different topics, in agriculture, precision farming, new initiatives with new platforms, how to connect consumer and producer. Again, COVID crisis showed how important is this. For example, in Slovenia, we started in 2017 about mobility in rural areas. And today we have in many Slovenian municipalities in rural areas free ride for people older than 65, organized by volunteers, municipalities, and some NGOs and volunteers who works for this. We have a lot of examples in tourism in rural areas, how to connect food producers, tourism, agriculture, other things. A lot of good practices in energy supply. We have some energy self-sufficient villages in Slovenia, where we combine all these new knowledges about wind, solar, biomass energy, batteries, other things. So we match both approach, as I said, bottom up and top down, so that we fulfill the needs of people. Care for elderly people. In my municipality, we prepared the concept of silver smart villages, where we will bring together all needs of elderly people and what can we do for them in that they can stay at home and organize them a lot of things. So we try through this concept of smart villages to combine these big ideas which are behind also climate changes, how to solve these climate problems, but on another hand with practical way. And as you said before, there are if we compare smart cities and smart villages concept, in smart villages concept there are always people in front, and we speak about small problems sometimes for, if you look, big problems, but this is the biggest problem for this village, for these people. And here are very important this social innovation and involvement of people in these topics. So I think, and I try to explain what we are doing. And here, for example, we have from last year or this year on 30 of June, Commissioner Šuica, responsible for demography and democracy, presented this long-term vision for rural areas. So I think it's necessary, as other spoke about, that we speak and the policies are for people. We are those, as it was said, executors of these policies. But it's really, really very important that people are involved, that they are part of this, and that we exchange these good practices. And this is sometimes, I think this convinces people when they see that it's possible to do. And this is a way how we can ensure really better quality of life. And as I said, there were many colleagues who work on smart cities concept, and it's great concept. There is no contradiction between these two concepts. We must cooperate together. As Alenka, who works in Alpine region, we have very good cooperation between these very good developed cities like Milano, Munich, Salzburg, Vienna, and mountain regions, rural regions where there is the tourism and other things. So it's really, there are many cases in these topics, and as I said, we must speak about people, bring them concrete projects. And for me, as member of European Parliament, who is each week at home, I usually say it's necessary to translate these big words, big policies in concrete life. Otherwise, people will not understand this, and people must work on these policies. I mentioned before Fit for 55 package, which is the executor, where are this executor regulation for Green Deal. If people will not understand them, if we will not bring them and explain what we are speaking about, we will not be successful, and people will not be part of this. But for sure, it will be necessary to be part of this. So I think it's enough for the second intervention. Thank you.
I'm conscious that we've got rather little time, because also I skipped over one point in my role as a moderator earlier. We need to show a video as well before we close at 12:30. So I've just got some quick questions which that we've received online, and the first actually builds on exactly what you've just said, Franc, which is one of those things of a top-down change potentially from the European Union. So the question from one of our viewers online says, how can the implementation of smart villages concept be combined with the EU's recovery funds? Are there examples of that combination already happening? If you could say a word or two about that, I would be grateful.
Yes, with pleasure. This top-down, for example, is in common agriculture policy. We accepted the regulations last week in European Parliament. There must be in strategic plan of each country smart villages strategy. It means that the government must prepare, the Ministry for Agriculture must prepare and involve this strategy. And this is covered by money of common agriculture policy. Then in cohesion policy and regional development policy, there are many tools which are used for implementation of these things what we speak about. And also in recovery plan, if recovery plan is plan in which we try to also fulfill this European strategy to green, digital, and resilient society. And in what we speak, if we speak about social care for elderly people in rural areas, if we speak about e-health, there are places inside these policies. So, as I said, it's very important that we understand the strategy, that we understand what we speak about, and try to get practical solutions on local, regional, national level through these policies, in which there are more than enough place for all these policies.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Going to more of the online questions. I have a question for Alenka Smerkolj, which says, act locally to mitigate global consequences. What can the Alpine Convention bring forward from a quality of life perspective? So, translating global problems down to how people can act locally, the question is trying to ask. It's a bit of a tricky question, I think. There is there an example of how you can translate lining up acting locally with global consequences or global changes?
Well, I think this is what we are actually doing. I would go back to the concept that Franc was mentioning before. I truly believe that you need to try and do the sandwich. The sandwich meaning first to do the top-down approach and connect it to the reality on the ground, and connect with the bottom-up approach. So I think this is what we are trying to do. This is what we are trying to fulfill, and I think each presidency is going a bit more concrete. So at what we try to do is at this Alpine conference level, try to set up the top priorities and policies that would help and improve, let's say, people's lives, as we said. On the other hand, we always try to link and see how this can be implemented on the ground. This goes to the living labs, I would say. This goes to all the municipalities. We work with a lot of municipalities, and this is where the high, let's say, or the nice words of declarations, of the reports, come down to earth. And this is what, this comes with working together, and this comes with communication. And this comes, and it's never easy, because at the beginning it really seems very far apart. But when the more you communicate, the more you speak, and the more you work together, the more you realize it is doable. I mean, climate change is a global thing. It's a global problem. But with what we did and what we're now trying to do with the implementation pathways, I think this is somehow, which of course have the grounds in each and every village at the end, not just in the Alps, but all around the world. This is how I think we should try and bring the two things together.
Right, I'm conscious that I'm now pretty much out of time, right? And we've also got to show a video which takes 4 minutes. So I'm afraid that there are some very specific questions which are in the chat there about data and indexes and so on. I'm very sorry to those viewing online. I'm simply unable to manage to cover those. So what I'd like to thank all of our panelists, and sorry to those of you that I didn't get to for a third round there due to the lack of time. So thank you very much indeed from my side, and also on behalf of those watching online for your participation in this round. We would then just like to close this session with a video that we would like to show. So if I can ask the tech team to play that video, please.
Solčavsko območje ima svoje čare, svojo karizmo. Poznani smo po alpskih biserih.
At my work, in the public administration at national level, I see how strong and key role public policies have in enabling conditions for citizens' good life. Since they are not place-based, they often fail to achieve that aim in the most appropriate way.
The COVID-19 pandemic forced us to consider what really matters in life. ask yourself, what can public authorities do to strengthen your quality of life?
Quality of life for me in general, it's very much around the family. I have 2 kids. A work-private life balance is really important for me.
I like reading and art class. I like that there's animals and the plants give us breath so we can live.
It's important also to learn something new in life. Even as you're adult, you can start do painting, writing, acting.
The Slovenian development strategy set the vision quality of life for all. To that very general vision, draft spatial development strategy adds territorial dimension, highlighting diverse needs of urban, rural, remote, mountainous, border or coastal areas and their people.
Soljčanom je pomembna kakovost življenja. Pomembni so kakovost okolja, dediščina ter tradicija, samooskrbnost ter medgeneracijska in pa medsebojna pomoč.
ESPON quality of life measurement methodology as structurally defined approach allows linking societal values, development expectations, as well as territorial specificities.
So the territorial dimension is closely linked to the quality of life, and that's why ministers and officials in charge of spatial planning have an important part to bring quality of life to all of you.
One great thing is to go so easily to my work and not lose 2 hours per day.
When I have to go to the office, I cannot completely avoid using the car, but I take the advantage of commuting by public transport and by bike. Such travel is less stressful and dependent on circumstances on the road. That improved my quality of life.
Domačini tu že od nekdaj živimo z naravo, ki nam pa daje vse potrebno za preživetje. Te zaveze so vodilo občine Solčava pri izboljšanju udobnega, varnega in privlačnega življenja vseh generacij pri nas na Solčavskem.
Life is not just work and live, then there is culture, and small country, small city, but lots of culture coming from abroad and international shows.
Very pleasant to discover something new in life. For example, to travel, maybe to meet someone extraordinary. Children gives you energy, make you smile.
As you have seen and heard, quality of life is a very complex concept. It has no one meaning or one definition because it depends on individual perceptions, interests, needs and expectations of individuals, of citizens, depending also where they live and where they come from. ESPON made an effort to propose a solution that measures and monitors the quality of life for the people and places. This policy tool is very useful because it puts people and places at the very forefront and respects the individual perceptions, understands them and transforms them into decision-making. We kindly recommend you to read the policy brief on the quality of life that ESPON made together with the Slovenian presidency of the EU Council.
Quality of life is about territory, and together with ESPON and with all the other countries in Europe, we are ready to push this forward because life is at the end of the day about quality of life.
Right, thank you very much indeed for showing the video. It's also personally improved my mood to see Claude Turmes present in the video there, someone I worked closely with as an MEP in a previous part of my career. With that, I would like to conclude the morning's program. We now have an hour of lunch break until 13:30, and then you will find the parallel sessions, all of which are running online, you can find directly on the ESPON website. So those starting just under an hour from now at 13:30. So look online, choose your session, and join and follow the links for those sessions running online from 13:30 onwards. Have a good lunch break and see you at 13:30.